Chat. Yes, remember that the meeting is being recorded. Uh, Thank you, Kathy. I like that, dependency. uh, it's good to have a little bit of humor as we start our day. So thank you for joining us. Uh, if you watch the news, there's a lot going on with the pandemic and schools being reopened. My heart feels for you. You have several kids you've had at home all summer, and you've had to be the entertainer, the feeder, the caregiver, the provider, et cetera, et cetera. It is hard. I only have one, but I can see why it would get a lot harder with more kids. Lots of political issues as well. And then we have those issues where I thought this is important to bring as a topic for the week, because there's a lot of fires going on, and we have a couple of systems in regards to weather that may hit this weekend in the Miami, Florida, Houston. And so if you have some establishments or some branching out of your business in those regions, you must be ready. But here in California, we have earthquakes, we have the fires, heat. More people die because of heat in California than because of more people die from heat in California than any other disaster, natural disaster. And that's because we have high temperatures, and then we also have the fires. And so we're experiencing that right now. There's more than 100 burning fires, if I am correct. And I know a firefighter who was driving one of the helicopters that the dispensing of water died. So our thoughts are with the family. I just can't even imagine what that is all about. The feelings and the safety of the work they were doing. So it's all safety at the job site, right? And how these things can be prevented. So I can't imagine the incident investigation that is going to take place to prevent an issue like that from happening again. These are firefighters, and these are issues of safety at the workplace because they train all of their lives. They are my respect and my thanks to all of you. If you work with the fire department or the city, you guys are awesome. All of you essential workers as well. Let's get started. It's just a sobering moment to think of those things happening. So our hearts are with the family, and thank you so much for all you do to keep everyone else safe at work. My information is on the screen. For those of you that don't know me, I've been doing safety since 2011, but I fell in love in safety ever since I was starting to work in my 20s in Mexico. I was working as data. I was gathering data from businesses, and I was allowed to see a lot of the working conditions of businesses in Mexico. And when I got here to the United States, I worked in the workers' compensation department for a large workers' compensation rehabilitation clinic. And then I've been doing, I went into the medical compliance. I actually started doing medical compliance work for surgical centers, and I saw that a lot of the injuries came from blue collar and construction. So I went back to school, got my certifications, and I wanted to help more to get to prevent these injuries from ever happening, because that's where the key is all about. So I've been out there building scaffold with you guys, or learning about your businesses. If you invite me, I'm very grateful. It really does help to see and be there, boots on the ground. So that's why you will find it that I am very adamant for those of you that are safety directors, environmental safety and health, to be boots on the ground, to go out there, to visit the workers, to talk to them, to do your actual discussions with them, and to ask them what they need, and to observe the work they do. Not just for the issue of disciplinary action taking place if they don't do something according to policy that you have prepared for them, but also because you learn a lot and you start doing safety the way it's supposed to be done. We as consultants do a lot of the preparing of the documents for you. And so you have this brand new emergency action plan put together for you with a list of the emergencies, et cetera. And then nothing happens. It's just a document that it is sitting in somebody's computer inside a hardware, or inside of a disk, or in a binder if you have a hard copy. and it's not very functional. No one really knows about it. And so today I want to highlight those gaps between your emergency action plan and what is actually happening at your workplaces. Remember that this is for informational purposes. You are in charge of your safety program. At the end of the day, it is the employer's responsibility to provide a safe and helpful place of employment. So the disclaimers right there on the screen. Remember, we are being recorded, and this is also with the purpose of you revisiting the sessions later on. So Lindsay can send you a link if you need to revisit any of these classes. The house burns in Napa, California. The fires in Napa come just a few years after devastating fires. You know, there's fires every year. So the wildfires are a big concern here in California. If you visit the OSHA website, like I'm sure many of you have been doing, the main two highlighted at the very top right corner are coronavirus, number one, and second is the smoke and wildfire safety. So that's something that it is under Cal OSHA's radar. Why? Because it's not just the firefighters, guys. You're thinking, but why does that matter to me? Why do I need to know about this? Well, if you have any job sites at any of the areas where there are wildfires going on or near the wildfires where the smoke is prevalent, the respiratory issues that could arise from exposing your workers or having them do activities that are physically demanding, construction, agriculture, installation of whatever in construction. You can be installing flooring, you could be installing windows, you could be whatever you're doing out there. If you're landscapers, if you are working in any of the zip codes or areas with poor air quality, it's a huge issue, and OSHA is visiting those places of employment because it's an emergency. It's what's happening right now, right? So let's talk a little bit about what this means for us. Oh, we also had the retro storm a couple of weeks ago that has left Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana devastated, looking like a refugee camp. Crazy. 3 deaths in Iowa were blamed on the retro that swept the Midwest. An Indiana woman was killed when her, wait a minute, I can't read because of the pictures here. When her mobile home was rolled by high winds. The storms caused widespread wind damage. They pushed eastward in the Midwest. In Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana, more than 1 million homes and businesses lost power. That's another emergency that you should have in your emergency action plan. Losing power. That could happen to any of us. And depending who you are getting service from, if you are with Southern California Edison, they do have a fantastic website where they will provide you with information about their schedule as to power outages that may be scheduled in order to do maintenance or in order to upgrade systems, because they are walking towards better, simpler, sensor-driven systems that allow for less or manual power to be out there and exposing people to hazards. So as a business, our responsibility is to check this out, to be on their alert system. They do have an alert system. All you have to do is put your zip code and they will be texting you or emailing you alerts as to any power outages that may be scheduled or that may have to do with public safety, like in the case of this fires that we just talked about. Because it's important that you have that information. So I don't even have to tell you more about this. It looks like they were Photoshopped, but these are real pictures. They're from the actual media, and the devastation is amazing. So when we see things like this, we really question ourselves, is there really anything that we could do as safety coordinators, as safety directors? Is there anything that we could do to prevent these things from hitting our businesses, killing people? Well, you know, you talk about 2 different types of emergencies. Those that are natural forces, natural disasters, and those that are man-caused emergencies, right? Or something unexpected, such as a medical emergency, right? So they're unexpected. Nevertheless, we must be prepared. So even for natural disasters, we must have a plan in place and training so that everybody knows their duties, they know what to do, and no one is running around like a crazy chicken without a head. People panic, people forget their training, but if you drill and train and remember and remind them and pass memos and add it into your tailgates, especially now, everything that is in the news, use it as an excuse to add it to your agenda and your safety meetings. Add it to your agenda. Hey, let's stay safe today. Let's check the air quality managers. I'm going to send you a link for air quality. So wherever you're sending your guys, check the air first and talk to me, get back to me and see if you guys are safe to go out there. Things like that. It's all an ongoing process, right? Remember, that's our jobs. That's our job. So our learning objectives today is, one of the first things that I want to make emphasis is in any program with OSHA is assigning a responsible person. OSHA is big on responsibility. Most of their mandated written programs start with, after they go through the scope and everything, anytime that they want to delineate elements of a written plan, because normally in order for you to have a compliant program, you have to have certain elements be met. And most of the time, the first element is responsibility. And one of the things that bothers me the most is to see responsibility. Management is responsible for the execution and update of this plan. Well, who's management? Is it you, safety director? Is it the human resources person? Is it the owner? Is it the CEO? Is it the CFO? It's, all of them are management. So that's the problem. That's where we see those gaps. Put somebody in charge, for heaven's sakes. Point the finger at them. And you may think, whoa, well, that's a big responsibility. If something goes wrong, that person heads on the line. Well, that's why it's so important that he has a supportive team, right? So that he's not the only one with this huge weight on his or her shoulders. It is important to have a responsible person. So after today, I really want you to have it as a to-do, to download if you have it in your disk, in the cloud, wherever you have. Get your plan, your emergency action plan, and review it. See the contents after we talk and discuss what's supposed to be in it. Determine if COVID-19 is a type of emergency that must be included in your organization's action plan. It's interesting, we are gearing towards fall season, flu season, and brace yourselves because that's when the flu hits everyone. And everybody that gets a cold is going to be freaking out because we're all going to be thinking we have COVID-19. So God forbid, is that an emergency? So many of you already know the answer. It's not an emergency, right? What it is you must have an infection control plan in place that assesses and actually deals with how to go about directing people that feel sick at work to go take care of themselves, to go to the doctor, to let us know beforehand so that they don't come to work and expose our people, right? So it's not an emergency per se, because you should have an actual written plan on how you're doing things. It would be an emergency if someone out of nowhere, out of the blue, starts having symptoms at work and then faint, or have some sort of a severe problem, respiratory problem at work. And so that falls within your medical emergency, right? If you should be listing it as a medical emergency. And 3, discuss the type of training that must take place once your emergency action plan has been formulated. There's several stages to it. You should have a way of having a discussion, like a round table discussion with your people and say, listen, we just put together an emergency action plan. I don't want to just have this document and not make you aware of it. These are the duties, these are the tasks. You're in charge of this, you're in charge of that. I have a lack of information in this regard. I don't know how many issues of fire or substances here at the facility are an issue for fire. So my program is lacking that information. So and so, I need you to give me that by next week. So and so, I need you to give me a list of all the things that we need to shut off that are important to shut off in case of an emergency. Because you cannot be expected to know it all. So once again, that's why as consultants, we may put a program or a plan together for you, and it is not complete until you review it and until you involve the people and the heads of departments that are actually going to make it come alive. If a disaster, so please don't be surprised if after having all these plans drafted for you, then you also get hit with not being compliant because of the lack of that communication or the implementation. So one thing is to have a written program, and the other part is the implementation of that program. And so if the two don't go together, you will still be hit with a fine. So that's where I really need you to pay attention, right? If a disaster hits your workplace, are you prepared? So criminal charges may be sought against your company if you do not have a response plan in place. Why? Because we're talking about mens rea, which is a Latin term for guilty mind, right? And guilty mind means that you knew better. And in this case, you're on this webinar, and because you're doing safety and because you are holding that title, or that, you know, that comes with a paycheck, or even if you don't have the paycheck and you haven't been named the safety director, but you've been given the responsibilities under the corporate criminal liability law here in California, you are responsible for the safety and health of your people, and you should do everything you can to the best of your knowledge to protect them. Another thing that comes into place in order to get those criminal charges filed against your company is if you have a safety violation history. Maybe in the past, OSHA visited your workplace and they saw that you had blocked exits. And they wrote it down, and it's in your history that 3 of your exits or your exit routes had debris, or you stored certain boxes, deliveries being made, and you just left them there for half the day and you didn't really remove things. So in case of an emergency, people had to encounter a lot of tripping hazards or just plainly not be able to reach that exit. Remember that this becomes a little bit of a problem because you're thinking, oh, come on, we have so many exits, right? It's like, I have like 5 or 10 exits or ways to exit the building, especially those of you with a nice warehouse. And you're like, look at this, it's an open space. So I even have the doors, the loading docks next to it for ventilation. And then we have this nice parking lot. There's no problem. And so you think that blocking exits is not a big deal. Well, it is, because what if the fire occurs right here, blocking the area where you have those big doors open? So now the person needs to look for the nearest exit, and that is blocked with deliveries. That's where the problem comes from. So all exits at all times must be free from any debris, any obstructions, any tripping hazards, anything that projects also over the exit or that could hit people in the head, etc. Knew about the requirement and ignored it. Now you're sitting here, you know about the requirement for making sure that your workplace is prepared in case of an emergency. So of course there's a lot that goes into it whenever there's legal action applied, right? So we have, for example, the case of a Milpitas worker who was trapped and died inside of a trenching and excavation because there was heavy rain, and because of this heavy rain, the problem was that the city took away all permits for trenching. So they basically give you a permit so that you can do your trenching. We do have a system of permits here in California, and trenching anything beyond 5 feet of depth requires a permit here in California. And the permit was canceled by the city. And I don't remember if it was the foreman, but it was management who said, oh, we were, about to finish whatever, asked the worker to continue working with that permit having been canceled. And the person was buried because the trenching became unstable, collapsed, and buried him alive. So people went to jail for this reason. And that's when criminal charges are sought against the company. And not just the company has to pay out. There's those third-party lawsuits, and there's also the OSHA documents becoming evidence in court against you, right? And then the personal liability. All of us sitting here today in this call, we all have personal liability. So the families can sue us personally for everything we have because of our negligence. So this is serious stuff. So how to prepare for events like this, how to have emergency action checklists. So OSHA.gov has a fantastic e-tool. Has any one of you reviewed the OSHA.gov e-tool for emergency action plan and preparedness? Anybody? So it sounds like some of you have. Okay, so now today you can, that's a to-do. I'll give you the link with our presentation, and you will visit this because you will realize that you have loopholes or that you left some incomplete parts of your emergency action plan. When you are in buildings, it becomes a little bit more convoluted also, because you also get to find out more about the businesses around you and how to cooperate together for evacuations or for response. So take a look at that too. Why have a responsible person? Because look at number 3, procedures to account for all employees. I'm sorry, not number 3. I wanted to take you to, these are all the elements 1 through 6, right? And it calls my attention that on this particular regulation, number 6 is the one that says names or regular job titles of persons or departments who can be contacted for further information or explanation of duties under the plan. Most of the time, the responsibilities, or when the regulation requires that you have a responsible person, is first stated into the program and into the elements of the program. And in this case, it's as number 6, but it's there. You may think it's hiding. It's there. It's right there. So the elements of a written emergency action plan are as follows. Procedures for emergency evacuation, including the type of evacuation, because you could be evacuating in place, you could have a lockdown procedure for mass shootings, you could have an actual total evacuation for certain types of emergencies. For earthquakes, you could have the stay in place until safe and then evacuate, which is very common. Number 2, procedures. And why do I say very common? Because that's following guidelines. So that's per I think it's called shakeout.org, that the website with a lot of information for earthquakes. And then you have FEMA, right? The Federal Emergency Management Agency, who has a ton of information on different types of natural disasters and how to respond to emergencies, such as mass shootings, right? Procedures to be followed by employees who remain to operate critical plant operations. So we could just put it like that and then elaborate. But then once again, how do we know what are the critical plant operations? It could be very simple or it could be very complicated. OSHA has another standard called process safety management, and that's for big companies with that meet a certain threshold of processing certain hazardous chemicals. So imagine the type of explanation they do just for number 2, element number 2, right? Who and which employees and the names of the job titles that will operate those critical plant operations before they evacuate. Which valves need to be turned off, which equipment must be completely disconnected, etc., right? Which flow tanks need to be, completely and responsibly looked under a certain, flow chart, so that you know how much of the chemical is in the flow tank or overflow tanks or whatever it is. The element number 2 of this regulation could be very simple or very large, right? So it could be just a simple, let's turn off the water, let's turn off the gas, to, under the process safety management program, we have A, B, C, and D. Procedures to account for all employees after emergency evacuation. All of you should have somebody, and it should be the lead person or whoever is in charge of that department, who once evacuated is able to count for the people in their department, and who also have a means of communicating with the other people that are coordinating the emergency evacuation. Because sometimes people in your department will be in the other side of the building and they will exit in the through the shortest route, wherever they are able to exit the building, right? Because that's the way they're supposed to be. And so someone will let you know that they are there so that you account for them. And that is important. It's important to have also that assembly area where it's safe, where you've gone outside, boots on the ground, looked at the area, you see there are no power lines, there's no traffic, people are not going to run out and then face traffic, or it's not an alley. You're not saying this is my assembly area, and it's an alley that quite often has traffic or vehicles backing up, like trash trucks and things like that, that could pose a risk for those seeking to get to that assembly area for being accounted for. All of those things you need to realize and take into account. Procedures to be followed by employees performing rescue or medical duties. Do you have people on site that are first aid, CPR trained, including the defibrillator use? Remember, that part is not mandated, but a lot for certain types of industries there is a mandate and a regulation to have AEDs available. Well, someone has to have training, right? And people without training shouldn't be providing any of this type of rescue or medical duty. The preferred means of reporting fires and other emergencies, are they going to be pulling a alarm, a manual alarm? Is that working properly? Does it make a sound? So that's why it's so important to walk around your building, see where they are, indicate to the workers where these pull stations are at. Let them know when is it that you actually sound the alarm, right? Depending on the type of facility, if you have a lot of substances that are at risk for fire, then you may want to say, anytime we have a fire, at any time, we are going to pull the alarm, notify the emergency coordinator that we have it under control if the fire is small, because during fire extinguisher training, we do what we say hands-on training, incipient stages of a fire. We take a look at the size of the fire when you're putting it out, and if you're okay and comfortable with putting it out, then you're just notified, everything is a-okay, you move on. But for some work sites, because of the type of environment or the chemicals or the hazardous materials, you will always notify the fire department just in case there's an issue afterwards, and they just check with you that it was safely put out, or if you need their assistance there at all times, right? So have your fire department or also visit you and see. I know they do their inspections, their annual inspections. So if you haven't had one inspection because you moved into a new building, or you haven't had one, just call your fire department. They're very, very friendly. I'm not sure that they're already doing the in-person visits, but it's very helpful because they'll point out where you are lacking or where you are having non-compliance issues, or where you're storing materials where you shouldn't, etc. Like one of the most common issues that I see out there is at any of your buildings, I don't care if you're in construction, manufacturing, or healthcare, walk around your buildings anytime you have any electrical equipment. And when I say electrical equipment, I'm referring to electrical panels, switchboards. That's electrical equipment. That's what we call electrical equipment. It needs to be free from any obstacles, meaning you have to be able to get to them in case of an emergency, because maybe someone from the critical operations side of the equation needs to get to it to turn it off. But a lot of us use those areas as storage. And so you find boxes, tools, paint, and a lot of things stored in front of this electrical equipment, especially because right in front of these walls with electrical equipment, you have these lines, these yellow lines that just seem to be attractive for storage, when in reality, the yellow painted lines on the floor are a clearance warning saying don't put anything here. All around this area needs to be free from any obstructions. Names of regular job duties of persons or departments who can be contacted. So we talked about that, and that's why you must have somebody responsible, right? The person that is responsible will develop, implement, and maintain the plan. So if you have a consultant develop your plan, make sure the person that is in charge of the plan at your facility is actually implementing it and holding that first meeting saying, hey, we have this new emergency action plan. This is how we're going to be doing it. I need names. I need to know if you feel comfortable doing the sweep, if you're going to be my emergency coordinator for the offices at the top floor, or if you're going to be my emergency coordinator for the warehouse. I need to know who in your team is also able to back you up. Because remember, we talk about people not always being at the work site. Sometimes they're going to be on vacation or sick or with COVID, God forbid. So because they may be quarantined, right? And so you're left without that person at the work site who was your emergency coordinator per your plan. So at least have 2-3 people, depending the size of your business. I really recommend 2 or 3. 3 is great because if the 2 of them are out, you still have one more person always on site. So implement and maintain the plan, meaning anything that changes, anything else that you're purchasing that may be a risk for fire or for any other type of emergency, you're actually making those changes in the plan. All facilities that could be impacted. And why does it say this? Because you're talking about not just your main facility, but anything that any business conducted off-site. Any business conducted off-site. For those of you that drive to take care of people at home, so home care, what are the emergencies that you could be facing? Well, you get to a home and the person is on heavy drugs and they are in a state of mind where they become violent. Workplace violence. We talked about it, 2 weeks ago? Was it 2 weeks ago, 1 week ago? Workplace violence, right? And so we talk about the ability for your worker to immediately have assistance. How are we doing in that department? Are we really keeping people safe, or is it just a plan that just talks about the beauty of keeping people safe, but it's not practical? That's what I mean. Separate plans for each facility. And then don't get me started on construction, right? With construction workers, we have the fact that there is a building that is not finished, that is actually at different stages throughout the project. And then you also have to take a look at the safety in case of earthquake, in case of fire, in case of flood, in case of heat, right? So what do? And one of the things that they need to know at the start of the project is, how do they exit the building in case of an emergency? How do they respond, right? And where are the medical emergency services coming from? How long are they gonna take? Do we have personnel on site able to take care of our workers in case they get sick, hurt, and they can't move, right? So different regulations call for different procedures. And so we're not gonna throw everything under the sun on this plan. We're gonna put a list of emergencies, and then the ones that correspond to something different, we will put it in its respective plan. For example, if we're talking about fall protection, you have people on harnesses wearing personal fall arrest systems. You are going to have a competent person, you're going to have a written policy, and you're going to have somebody that organizes rescue, right? In case someone actually falls, right? You have this in that policy, in that plan, how you're going to handle an emergency when somebody falls wearing a harness, right? So that's not going to be in this plan, it's going to be in that plan or policy. And with fall protection, I'm cautious about using the word plan, fall protection plan, because you're not required to have a plan unless under certain circumstances. So it's a policy on how you're doing all of this. But anyways, same thing, right? That's why I'm talking about this, because depending on what you're doing out there, all your facilities and all of the field work that you're doing is impacted differently, right? And so you have to have a way of when you do your morning huddles for construction workers, you know, in case of an emergency, this is where the exits are. This is where you would take people that are hurt. This is how we communicate, and this is how communicate, and this is how fast we're expecting someone to be here on site for help, to help. And then you also tell them who is on site to provide first aid and CPR, right? And the rest of the people that don't know or do not want to involve themselves in providing help or care for the wounded and injured, you let them know that they need to stay away, that aside from helping to call and staying safe, that they don't mess around, they don't get in contact with blood and other potentially infectious materials, etc., and offsite work, etc. So very good. So designate specific individuals responsible for various tasks reporting the emergency. How are they going to report them? Do they yell fire? So if someone says, just, you know, we don't have an actual electrical alarm, we don't pull an alarm, we don't press a button, we don't have any of that, we're a smaller building. So what is the word they use, right? Some of you make up some codes, code blue, code, you know, healthcare has their own codes, but if you're in a different type of business, you may have some codes that you yell out, so that, or that you say, in order not to scare the patrons or the customers. It's all up to you. Monitoring the evacuation. So how do you monitor the evacuation? By sweeping the areas, by making sure no one's left behind, but you don't go back. As you exit, you sweep, you open doors, you knock on doors, you verify the restrooms are empty, right? Performing rescue, medical, or critical plan operation duties that I talked about, determining closure period. So when are we going to close? When are we going to open? If we have a power outage, you know, what are we going to do? Contacting utilities. So all of these phone numbers need to be either first page on your plan or first page on the binder for off-site workers or construction workers. Addressing chemical spills, cleanup. How do we do this for small spills? Who detects them? How do they clean it up? Do they have spill kits available right there in the same area available to them, because we know that's the area that has chemicals that could spill? Or are we having some issues where we're not having good quality containers, they keep rupturing or spilling, or when we receive shipments, we're having containers that come broken or leaking, and this is an issue that occurs often. why aren't you doing something? So take a look at the company you're working with, get a different vendor. I mean, prevention is better than responding to an emergency. Address expectations of each employee. Employees will have a lot of questions, and when you do training, it's your opportunity to tell them to let them know what their role is in regards to the emergency action plan. You should be giving training in regards to the emergency action plan the moment you implement it. So initially, when they come on board, as well as new hires, and whenever you change anything in your plan. So you are going to do an assessment of the hazards, the types of emergencies, all the components of your business, how each emergency would affect each component, offices, manufacturing facilities, remote locations, etc., response for potential emergencies. What to do in the event of a fire, how to report, how to account for all, what to do. So those are the procedures, right? We talked about the requirements for the elements, and then you're going to do how are you going to do this. Emergent evacuation maps are mandated. It should be in every room so that people sitting in an office can actually refer to it right away as they're evacuating. You should let them know where the route is, where the exits are, and where the assembly is at. If you have any pull stations or way to activate an alarm, you should also let them know on the map. And if possible, also add the location of fire extinguishers, right? So there's a list for you. Fire, medical emergencies. So this is very general, and that's a good list. I like that good list. I like for you to consider the following. So once you've considered that list in your plan, you're going to delineate how you tackle each of those. And to tackle each of those emergencies, you go to the website if you don't know, if you don't have anything previous that you want to, that you can review. Like for example, with fire, say activating the alarm, making a decision as to, you know, whether or not you're going to call the fire department. Some of you have a policy where you say, no matter what, if we have a fire, we're calling the fire department, because we want to make sure that they know that we had a fire, and in case we need them for support, they've been notified, right? And they can also follow up with us. Medical emergencies, how do you handle a medical emergency? How do you handle a chemical spill, as we were talking? How do you handle it? If you notice 5 and 6, I divided them. 1, electrical utility failure, power outage. Do you have generators in place? Do you need them, or can you just shut off and just kind of wait it out? Or is your business the type of business like hospitals can't wait it out, right? You need to have generators, backup power generators that come on as the outage takes place, and who's in charge of what, etc. And then having that communication with it could be the Southern California Edison company or whoever your distributor is, so that they inform you continuously of the status of the outage and what stage are they at, so that you know what to expect and how to prepare for the length of that outage. Electrical fall and power line is different, and I put it as number 6 because I have some clients that do have people driving right there on the road, so fleet safety is an issue. And one of the things that we consider is, what if there's an electrical fall and power line in front of you, or if there's an earthquake and there's electrical fall lines and you are driving, and because of the earthquake, one of the recommendations is to pull over, stay in place as you pull over, and then you have power lines that just landed on top of your car or right to the side of the road. It is said that we are actually expecting a big earthquake in sometime soon right here in California, because we haven't had a big one. And so, well, earthquakes, you know, we just had one, a couple months ago. My dad called me. I didn't even feel it because I was working out. And so sometimes they're stronger than others, but we should be ready for that too. And for workplace violence, some of you like to put in your emergency action plan the bomb threats, the mass shootings, etc. But you could also make it a totally different policy, because workplace violence is not just issues of bomb threats and mass shootings. Workplace violence could also encompasses something else, which is the just threats of violence, right? So verbally assaulting someone or psychologically abusing someone at work. Those are all, such as bullying, or nowadays we have a lot of the social media bullying, which is also part of workplace violence, because it can carry into the relationships at work and create a hostile environment. So workplace violence has those two components to it. One, where we have the physical assault and the physical violence taking place, like a mass shooter or the bomb threat. And we also have the threats, right? Like someone that starts getting violent over time. So it's good to have a separate policy. Actually, that's my recommendation for workplace violence, and also have it under your injury and illness prevention program. It all depends on the size of your business and what you have going on. Right here you have the links for workplace violence. You have 3203, which is the Injury and Illness Prevention Program, and Section 3342, which we visited extensively last week. And it's all the workplace violence prevention for healthcare, which is mandated here in California. And hospitals and acute care are mandated to report any violent incidents, because OSHA has been mandated by government to actually have an annual reporting of all these incidents and why they happened. Heat illness, and by the way, they also trigger inspections, etc., but it's all with the goal of preventing those issues from repeating again. Heat illness. So I urge you to have a plan that includes a procedure for emergency response as mandated by Section 3395. So just like I told you with fall protection, how you plan rescue and emergency services prior to putting people on harnesses. Listen to that. Prior to putting people on harnesses, you're planning on how to rescue them in case of an emergency. For heat illness, you also have an emergency response pre-plan under 3395. And so same thing with COVID-19 in healthcare. You already know, if you have patients that are suffering respiratory arrest, how do you handle those types of situations, right? Where do they go? Do they go to the IC unit? You have a whole entire process of taking care of those people, which are customers, right? But the emergency action plan applies not to customers or patients, but it is for the safety of the workers, right? So of course, if you have visitors or clients, etc., it includes evacuating them and having procedures in place to make sure they also exit the building or are evacuated in a safe manner. All of that needs to be taken into account. Healthcare looks at Title 8, California Code of Regulations, Section 5199, which voila, it is the aerosol transmissible disease, because it does give you that idea on what to do in regards to aerosol transmissible diseases such as COVID. And we said it is under that category right now, just because it is a novel virus, not because it's airborne, but because it is a novel virus and we are still learning from it. Okay, so guys, what else? We tell people this is what is expected of you. These are the threats and the hazards. This is the response procedure, the notification. How do we notify, either verbally, or how do we warn people? What is the communication that's going to happen? All of the locations, you do it per your location. You practice drills. By the way, in the regulation here in California, we do not have a requirement for drills, but your city and your county may have requirements for fire drills. So talk to your fire department, ask them about this, depending on the occupancy of your building, how many people you have in that building, depending how many people you have on the first floor and the second floor, or the warehouse, and the classification of your business. The drill may be mandated once a year or quarterly. So if you don't know, call your fire department. For those of you in healthcare, in a building, if you have a small office, you're in a building, and you're not sure whether or not you're required to do a drill, well, call your health department. Local health department will tell you, and they're like, okay, what is your address? Oh, you're the medical offices in building, blah, blah, blah. Yes, well, you're not required to do a drill. It is recommended. They'll always tell you it is recommended, because when you do a drill, you actually just kind of fake out an emergency. You sound the alarm. You notify. If your alarm system is connected to your fire brigade, to a fire brigade, or your firefighting in your city, to the firefighters in your city, you have to let them know that you're going to be a drill, what's your schedule, etc., so that they know that you're practicing a drill. Make sure people don't get used to these practice drills and stay in place, meaning they ignore them, and you allow them to ignore the drills because some of them are so busy working that you make an exception. So never make exceptions. If you are doing drills, all of them evacuate, and all of them are included in practice. And if someone stays behind and hides under the desk because they don't want to go out and do the drill and do the evacuation, you are on them, disciplining them, because people have been killed that way, meaning there's that alarm overkill. Oh, this is another drill. They think it's another drill when it's an actual emergency. and then they can get killed. So people need to be, all of them need to be included in, whoever is at the building or at the facility or other location, included in the drills. They need to do it, no exceptions. Duties, what are their duties? Did you just evacuate? Are you in charge of doing some sweep duties? Do you check the bathrooms? What do? Do you take care of sick and injured? What is it that you take care of? You shut off valves, equipment, alarms. What do? What is your actual job? Hazards unique to your job site. So if you're operating a piece of equipment that is electrical and there's a power outage, how important it is for that employee to know, hey, I need to turn it off before I exit or stop my work and I go find out what's going to happen next. It's super important because you don't want equipment that is left running without power, and then the moment power comes back on, the machine can't get there could be some damage to the machines, or they could be even more serious in catastrophic events where a worker gets killed because of the restart of machinery and equipment when they were not expecting it because no one shut them off. So more resources. This is the emergency action plan, the elements. This is what it looks like. I wanted to point out, you guys, and this is very important. I don't care that you already have an emergency action plan that looks beautiful and you included fire in it. Cal OSHA wants to see a separate document for fire. Okay, so let me repeat that again. You must go back today and look at your binder, your safety binder, and you have to have an emergency action plan that includes fire, all the list of all the emergencies that I list. That's perfectly fine. And then under each of those emergencies, you take a look at how you are responding to each of them, right? But for fire, aside from having that blurb of how you're responding to fire, you must have a separate fire prevention plan. And look at this. In this fire prevention plan, you look at the potential fire hazards. So have a person in charge. So if I am the emergency if I am the actual person in charge of my emergency action plan, I'm going to designate, for example, my warehouse guy. And I'm going to say, hey, you know what, Panfilo, I need you to help me with the fire prevention plan. I need you to put all of your knowledge in your warehouse area, and I need you to tell me what are the fire hazards. Where do you have combustible and flammable liquids? Do we have any flammable cabinets that are not used appropriately? So are we mixing incompatible materials inside of them, which is a very common violation, by the way. Many times we have leaking chemicals inside of those. You like the Panfilo, yes? So Panfilo comes back to you and tells you, we don't have any flammable cabinets. Or yes, we have two, but they're very old, and I open them up and we have all sorts of chemicals in there. Some of them are leaking. I can't even read the label. Okay, so all of that tells you the importance of why having a fire prevention plan that is separate from your emergency action plan is so crucial. And that responsible person is going to help you with just the fire hazards. What are the fire hazards in your facility? Give me a second here, because I can't see my screen. What are your fire hazards? What are the, the handling and the storage procedures? What are the potential ignition sources? Why is this important? Because you may have welding going on in your facilities. You may have cutting going on at your facilities. You may have smoking allowed, or an area where people go and smoke, and it shouldn't be an area. Well, nowadays those are way tighter, and we have good people doing posting signs and everything, and a lot of you have smoke-free workplaces, etc. Nevertheless, potential ignition sources, even static electricity is an issue. So just walking by that area represents an issue, because you can be the carrier of static electricity because of the fact of the shoes you're wearing. You know what I mean? So potential ignition sources need to be listed, and then according to those potential ignition sources, you implement control measures. If it is just static electricity, you are putting tools in that area that are for that purpose, to prevent them from generating static electricity, right? So if you have welding and cutting. Now, some of you are thinking, that doesn't apply to me. I don't have a facility where we're welding or cutting. Guys, even if you're a hospital or in a clinic, there will be some construction at times taking place. So those people that are doing cutting and welding and all of that may not have a fire extinguisher in place, and a fire erupts, and now your emergency action plan kicks in, right? So take a look at those issues. Does your building, your landlord has an actual process of weeding out people or third party contractors that come on site and that are not, that are safety compliant, right? Because in our documentation, we make sure that the people that come and do any repairs or welding or changes to our building or structures have a way to prove that they've been trained under the Cal OSHA regulations. And this is one of them, right? Names the regular job titles for those responsible for maintenance of equipment and systems installed to prevent or control ignitions of fires. Names the regular job titles of those responsible for the control of accumulation. So even the accumulation of flammable or combustible waste materials. So if you have a shop where guys are using rags and then you have oily rags, how are you disposing of them? There's an accumulation of oily rags. Where are you putting them? And if it's just oil, do you have the appropriate waste containers with the lid? Or is it that the rags have actually a solvent because you're using a solvent and you are actually, you know, cleaning parts with it? Okay, so now you have an accumulation of that. All of this is in that plan, the fire prevention plan. Housekeeping, employers shall control accumulations of these flammable combustible materials and residues so that they do not contribute to a fire emergency. So the guy that you put in place in charge of your fire prevention program needs to be knowledgeable. And if he's not knowledgeable, he needs to do some homework, because he needs to understand the difference between flammable and combustible liquids. He needs to understand the lower exposure limit versus the upper exposure limit. A lot of the things that come into play with you know, the quantities that you can put inside of flammable cabinets and how to hook them up correctly. And manufacturers play a very important part into telling you how to have a flammable cabinet that it is set up appropriately. Training, also training people in the areas where these things take place. Useful documents, sample plans, evacuation drill discussion, handouts, current insurance. Okay, so your current insurance broker many times provides you with training programs or documents or policies that you can derive from and use. Also use the Cal OSHA information and use the OSHA e-tool to build your own program. So let me take you there. That's a very good tool. I'm going to share this with you guys. Oh, what did I do here? You all can see my, I know you can all see my screen. So there it is. Don't you like that? The alert, due to routine maintenance, some pages may be temporarily unavailable. That happens often, by the way. But the OSHA website is an amazing website for learning about the regulations. The Cal OSHA website is very good, but their e-tools are not as user-friendly. They're getting better, so please don't take it wrong. They are getting a lot better, but they're harder to navigate than the OSHA.gov. My biggest piece of advice is always go to the OSHA.gov, tinker around, look at what they have, learn the stuff. Like if you're putting somebody in charge of your fire prevention plan and say, hey, Panfilo, you're gonna be in charge of my fire prevention program, make sure that he goes into the OSHA.gov and studies about the fire prevention or the evacuation plan procedures e-tool. He looks at, oh, look, emergency action plan. I wonder what, oh, fire. Okay, so since she put me in charge of the fire, yeah, I want to go to the fire and see what they have to do, you know, fire rescue, medical services, emergency standards. There's one for fire prevention. Okay, so that's what I'm in charge of. So it says here, fire prevention, the requirements. Okay, now remember, she told me I'm on the OSHA.gov, which is for federal. So after learn from this, step number 2 is to go to the Cal OSHA website and learn from them to see what I really have to do. The requirements here, which by the way are very similar to the Cal OSHA, because remember, Cal OSHA drew everything from federal, copied it, and then modified it, or they're stricter than federal, so sometimes we'll have an extra requirement, etc. Fire prevention plan must be in writing, so it has to be separate from the emergency action plan. If an employer has 10 or fewer employees, you may communicate it orally, right? At a minimum, your fire prevention plan must include a list of all major fire hazards. We just talked about it. What are my major fire hazards? Oh, I have gasoline. Look at that. I have gasoline over here for my saws or my power tools here, my hedge trimmers, and I have some diesel, and you're looking and you're writing down what you have, and all of a sudden you go, oh, I have plastic cans. I wonder I should have something better. Yes, you should, right? Because nowadays we have the safety cans for flammable liquids with the flame arresters, and so it's a little more expensive, but it's going to keep your people safe. They can transport them in their truck, etc. Procedures to control accumulations of flammable and combustible waste materials. We talked about that. So there's the requirements, right? Okay, so that's what I have to do. Fixed extinguishing. What is that all about? Oh yeah. We do have some of those, sprinklers. What are the actual requirements there? Commonly used to protect areas containing valuable or critical equipment, data processing or telecommunication switches. Oh, we do have one in our, telecommunication room, etc. And does it apply to me? And then you keep going and going. And then there's NFPA. NFPA stands for the National Fire Protection Agency. By the way, if you need to get into any of this because you use a particular type of fire extinguisher, let's say that you have the type of equipment where you can only use carbon dioxide extinguishing system. Okay, so now you have to read the NFPA 12 because under that, you will find a lot of information about it. How to operate them safely, everything else that you need to know about them, how to activate the cartridge, what are the pros and the cons to it, etc. Because it's a carbon dioxide. Does it generate what type of, how does the chemical get dispersed? Do we have enough air in the actual immediate atmosphere, etc. So a lot to it. And the thing is, these are not for free. The NFPA standards, the National Protection Fire Agency sells them, so you just go to their website and buy them, download them, print them, and keep them also in your hardware or your hard disk, right? So I just took you a little bit down into the actual fire prevention plan. But for the emergency action plan, you get into fight or flee, sheltering in place, right? So that's a good question, right? Sheltering in place. When do we say, do we prepare to stay or go? See, great information. It really is good. Depending on your circumstances, the type of emergency, the important decision is, do you stay put together or you get away? You should understand the plan for both possibilities, right? Determine what is immediate danger. So you can keep reading it. I'm not going to read it word by word, but for example, when you have mass shootings, right? A lot of the times, depending where you're at, people will lock themselves inside an area because that will keep them safer rather than start to run outside. So depending on the threat, you will tell people what to do. And so you have both options, both choices, and you communicate which one of the two they should do. Additional assistance, what education and training does OSHA offer, what other publications, etc. So this is a very good e-tool for creating it. And then on the expert systems, you go to creating your own emergency action plan. Does OSHA require you to have an EAP? And it's required. If you have less than 10 employees, you're not required to have it in writing. Do I advise you to have it in writing? By all means, have it in writing, because words, the wind will take them, and you will never have a way to prove that you provided employees with the information necessary to stay safe during an emergency. So creating it's awesome because you will begin here. And you can start answering questions, your company name, your company contact, right? And then alerts in the event of an emergency. Employees are alerted by sounding an alarm, public address system announcement, verbal announcement, so it gives you a little bit of what they're looking for. And that's a good way to go about. Do you have any questions, anybody? It's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Yes, thank you so much, Alba, for another great presentation. The slides will be sent out later today, and the recording will be uploaded to our COVID page later today. And then we'll also be sending out evaluations. So if you have any topic suggestions or any topics you'd like to perhaps see in these sessions, just please let us know in the evaluations.
Please, thank you, everyone. And remember, we have bloodborne pathogens for our training session in September 8th and 9th, Lindsay?
I think it's 9th and 10th.
Yeah. 9th and 10th, I'm sorry. And it's 2 hours one day, 2 hours the next day. And then we have the ethics and safety and health. So Lindsay sends you that email through, it gets to you, not with Lindsay's name, but it gets through Southern
California ERC, yeah, the weekly email blasts. So if you have any questions, just look at.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. Yeah, you can find the links and details there, and then it can direct you to our web pages for more details on those courses. Yeah.
Thank
But
you, Joe.
again, yeah, let us know if you have any questions about those courses or anything that Alba mentioned today. So
Thank
thank
you,
you.
guys. Stay safe. Stay
Yes.
safe. I know there's a lot going on out there, but I commend you for doing your safety duties and keeping everyone safe at work. Thank you. You are the ones doing it out there, and I thank you for inviting me to your workplaces to enhance the knowledge, to bring it back to you and back to the workers. Have a fantastic weekend, everyone. Lindsay, have a great weekend, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.